You're joking, right? Mia's voice trembled, a mix of disbelief and desperation. She gripped the edge of the cherry oak table, her knuckles white against the polished wood. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a picture of calm indifference. I'm afraid not, cousin. The will is clear. One of us must have a child to claim the inheritance. His smile was all sharp edges, a predator's grin that made her stomach churn. Mia's heart raced, a wild drumbeat of panic. She had counted on this inheritance, needed it more than she dared to admit. But the idea of a child, this is insane, you know I can't. Can't or won't? Ethan's eyes gleamed with a knowing glint, the kind that saw through her every facade. Her voice dropped to a whisper, words barely escaping her clenched throat. It's not like that, Ethan. He leaned forward, the air between them crackling with tension. Do you think I don't know about your little scheme, the whispers about a pregnancy that isn't real? Mia's blood ran cold, her carefully constructed plan teetering on the brink of collapse. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But remember, Mia, secrets have a way of coming out, and when they do, I'll be waiting. His words were a dagger, twisting deep, leaving her breathless. She had thought she could control this, keep everything under wraps. But now, as the runes seemed to close in around her, she realized the storm she feared was only just beginning. The lawyer cleared his throat, oblivious to the storm brewing between the cousins. Shall we continue? Mia nodded numbly, her mind racing. She needed time, a new plan, anything to outmaneuver Ethan. But as she met his gaze, she saw a challenge she wasn't sure she could overcome. And with that, the first cracks in her armor began to show. Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The room was thick with tension, the air almost oppressive in its silence. The dim lighting from the antique chandelier cast elongated shadows across the long, cherry oak table, lending an air of solemnity to the moment. The scent of old leather and polished wood mingled with a faint trace of lavender, a lingering fragrance from the vase of wilting flowers in the corner. Mia sat at the table, her fingers clenched tightly around the edge, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the world. She felt the cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips, grounding her in the present. Across from her, her cousin Ethan leaned back in his chair, exuding a calm that only masked the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. His eyes, a steely blue, seemed to pierce through the shadows, focused and unyielding. The lawyer droned on, their words a distant hum in Mia's ears, drowned out by the whirlpool of thoughts and emotions swirling within her. According to the terms of the will, the lawyer was saying, the inheritance is to be divided equally unless. Mia's eyes flicked to Ethan, catching the briefest flicker of something in his gaze, an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was gone before she could pinpoint it, replaced by the familiar, unreadable mask he wore so well. For a moment she remembered the summer they spent at their grandfather's estate, running through sun-dappled fields, the world a canvas of greens and golds. Back then, Ethan's smiles had been genuine, filled with warmth and an unspoken camaraderie. Unless what? Mia heard herself ask, her voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside her. Her heart was a caged bird, fluttering wildly against the bars of her ribs. Ethan's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Unless one of us has a child, he said, his tone as smooth as it was lethal. The words hung in the air, a loaded gun pointed directly at her heart. Mia's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. She had known, of course, about the clause, the ridiculous, antiquated stipulation her grandfather had insisted upon. But hearing it aloud, in this room, with Ethan staring at her like a wolf watching its prey, made it all too real. The memory of their grandfather's study flashed in her mind, the walls lined with dusty tomes, the air thick with the scent of pipe smoke and old paper. She had loved those afternoons, listening to stories of their family history, unaware that those tales carried the weight of expectation. We both know that's never going to happen, Mia shot back, her voice a low tremor that betrayed more than she intended. Her words were a shield, fragile but defiant. Ethan's gaze was unwavering, a challenge wrapped in silk. "Never say never, me." There was a soft menace in his voice, an undercurrent of something darker that made her skin prickle with unease. She wanted to scream, to hurl something across the room, to run and never look back. Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "This is insane, Ethan. You can't possibly think." "Think what?" he interrupted, leaning forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes dark and intent. "That you could carry this on without me finding out? That we could just ignore it and hope it goes away?" His words were like hooks, dragging unspoken truths to the surface. Mia's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum of panic and fury. She knew what he was implying, knew where his mind had leapt to, and she hated him for it, hated him for knowing her so well, for guessing the plan she hadn't even fully formed in her own mind. "You don't know anything," she spat, the words laced with venom. Her defiance was a flickering candle against the dark certainty in his eyes. Ethan's smile widened, a predator's grin. "I know enough, and I know you, Mia. You might have everyone else fooled, but not me." His voice was a whisper of the past, a reminder of shared secrets and broken promises. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, squeezing the air from her lungs. She couldn't break, not here, not now. Not in front of him. "This isn't about us," she said, the words more a plea than a statement. "Isn't it?" he countered, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. His words were a mirror, reflecting the tangled history between them, a history she had desperately tried to forget. The lawyer cleared their throat, a polite interruption that only served to heighten the tension. "Perhaps we should reconvene at a later date," they suggested, their eyes flicking nervously between the two of them. The lawyer's presence was a thin veneer of professionalism over the raw, emotional battlefield. Mia nodded, grateful for the escape, even if only temporary. She pushed back her chair, standing on unsteady legs. "This isn't over," she told Ethan, her voice firm, even as she felt herself unraveling. Her resolve was a fragile thread, woven from the remnants of past strength. Ethan rose as well, his eyes never leaving hers. "It never is," he said softly, a promise and a threat intertwined. His words lingered in the air, a haunting echo of a bond that was both unbreakable and irreparably fractured. As they left the room, the charged silence followed them, like a shadow. Mia's mind raced, a single thought looping endlessly. How had they come to this? Once, they'd been close, closer than either had dared to admit. But that was before the lies, before the betrayal, before the twisted strings of inheritance had pulled them apart. Outside, the sky was overcast, the promise of rain heavy in the air. The clouds hung low and ominous, casting a gray pall over the world. Mia paused on the grand stone steps, taking a deep breath, the cool air balm against the heat of her emotions. Her mind already working on the next steps. She needed a plan, needed to stay ahead of Ethan. Because she wasn't just fighting for the inheritance. She was fighting for herself, for a future that didn't revolve around a legacy she didn't want. As she stood there, memories of her grandfather surfaced, his voice a ghostly echo in her mind. "Family is everything, Mia," he had said once, his eyes twinkling with wisdom and mischief. But the inheritance had twisted those words into something she barely recognized. And somewhere, deep down, she knew the truth was coming, knew it would shatter everything in its path. But first, she had to survive Ethan, and the tangled web of emotions that threatened to ensnare them both. The storm was brewing, and Mia steeled herself, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 2. The Storm Inside. The rain came suddenly, a torrential downpour that hammered against the windows of Mia's apartment. Each raindrop was a tiny percussion, a rhythmic chaos that mirrored the storm swirling within her. The rivulets of water raced down the glass, blurring the world beyond into a watercolor of grays and blues. The air inside was thick with the scent of rain and the faint musk of old wood. The dim light from a solitary lamp cast long shadows that danced like specters in the corners. echoing the turmoil within her heart. Mia stood by the window, her reflection a ghostly figure against the backdrop of the storm. Her phone lay on the table, a silent sentinel bearing witness to the text message she had sent Ethan an hour earlier. "Meet me at the old place. We need to talk." The words had felt like stones in her stomach, heavy and unyielding. Her heart was a wild thing, each beat a drum of anxiety and anticipation. The pulse of it reverberated through her, a relentless reminder of the risk she was taking. She knew she was playing with fire, knew that inviting him here was dangerous. But the truth had to come out, and it had to come out now. The inheritance was a noose around her neck, tightening with each passing day. And the lie was the final straw, the catalyst that would either save her or destroy everything she had left. The knock on the door was sharp and impatient, cutting through the silence like a knife. Mia took a deep breath, steeling herself as she crossed the room. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the doorknob, a physical manifestation of the storm raging inside her. She opened the door to find Ethan standing there, rain-soaked and tense, his eyes a stormy tempest of emotions she couldn't quite read. "You wanted to talk," he said, his voice low and edged with something she couldn't name. He stepped inside, leaving a trail of water in his wake, the door clicking shut behind him. The air between them was charged, the kind of tension that could ignite with the slightest spark. Mia nodded, her throat tight with the words she had to say. She gestured towards the living room, where the dim light cast an intimate glow over the space. "We need to clear the air, Ethan." He followed her, his presence a tangible weight in the room. "You seem pretty clear to me in the lawyer's office," he retorted, his words a sharp knife between them. She turned to face him, her heart in her throat. "This isn't about the past or the inheritance," she said, her voice a fragile thread of determination. "It's about the future, and a lie I told." Ethan's eyes narrowed, suspicion and something else, a flicker of hope, perhaps, dancing in their depths. "What lie, Mia?" The moment hung between them, charged and electric. The air was thick with tension, the kind that could ignite at the slightest provocation. She took a deep breath, her chest aching with the effort. "I'm not pregnant, Ethan." The silence that followed was deafening, a void that swallowed everything in its path. Ethan's expression shifted, a kaleidoscope of emotions that settled into something hard and unreadable. "You lied," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated with disbelief and anger. "To me, to everyone." Mia nodded, tears stinging her eyes. I thought it would buy me time, that it would make things easier, but it didn't, it just made everything worse." Ethan laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the air. "You think," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Jesus, Mia, you always find a way to make things complicated." The words stung, but she didn't flinch. She had known this confrontation would be brutal, had prepared herself for the backlash. "I was desperate," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what else to do." He stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers, a maelstrom of fury and something else, something that made her heart skip a beat. "You could have talked to me," he said, his voice softer now, laced with disappointment. "We were supposed to be in this together." The old place, the shared history, the ghost of what they once had, it all crashed down on her, a wave of regret and longing. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls were waiting to see what would happen next. "I know," she whispered, her voice a raw plea. "I was scared, Ethan, scared of losing everything, but most of all, scared of losing you." His eyes softened, the anger ebbing away to reveal the vulnerability beneath. "You never had to lie to keep me, Mia," he said, reaching out to touch her cheek, his fingers warm and gentle. "I would have stayed, I always would have stayed." The contact sent a jolt through her, a spark of something dangerously close to hope. She leaned into his touch, her heart aching with the weight of her choices. I need to know if we can find a way through this," she said, the words a fragile bridge between them. Ethan's eyes searched hers, a silent conversation of promises and past hurts. "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty a bomb and a wound all at once. But I want to try. The rain pounded against the windows, a relentless backdrop to the storm inside them. Mia felt a tear slip down her cheek, a release of all the tension and fear she had held inside. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but it was enough." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his warmth a refuge against the chaos. "We'll figure it out," he murmured into her hair, his breath a soft promise. "Together." As they stood there, the world outside was a blur of rain and darkness, but inside there was a flicker of light, small and tentative, but growing. It was the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. And for the first time in a long time, Mia allowed herself to hope. Later, as the rain continued to drum its relentless symphony against the windows, Mia and Ethan sat in the glow of the living room lamp, the remnants of their storm lingering but beginning to fade. They spoke quietly, their words weaving a new tapestry of understanding and shared resolve. It was a fragile piece, but it was theirs, and, as the night deepened, so did their commitment to finding a path forward. Outside, the storm began to wane, the first hint of dawn painting the sky with hues of possibility. Chapter 3, The Edge of Truth. The first rays of dawn filtered through the rain-streaked windows, casting a fragile light that danced across the room like a promise unfulfilled. Outside the world gleamed with a fresh, dewy sheen, each droplet on the windowpane refracting the morning light into tiny prisms, scattering rainbows across the walls. The storm had abated, leaving behind a world washed clean, but inside Mia's apartment, the atmosphere was anything but serene. Tension coiled around them, a living, breathing entity that refused to be ignored. Ethan paced the length of the room, his movements restless and agitated, the lines of his body taut with unspent energy. His footsteps, a soft but insistent rhythm against the hardwood floor, mirrored the turmoil within him. His eyes, a stormy blue, flickered with emotions too complex to name. Mia watched him, her heart a tangle of emotions she couldn't quite unravel. The truth had been a double-edged sword, cutting through their defenses and leaving them raw and exposed. "You lied about something so crucial," Ethan said, his voice a low, simmering growl that reverberated through the air like distant thunder. His words were jagged, each syllable a shard that pierced the fragile calm. "Do you even understand what that means, Mia?" Her hands clenched at her sides, every muscle in her body wound tight. The air felt thick, charged with the electricity of their conflict, and the scent of rain mingled with the tension, a crisp reminder of the storm they were still weathering. "I know," she said, the words a quiet admission of guilt. Her voice trembled, a leaf caught in the swirling currents of their shared turmoil. "But I didn't know what else to do with the inheritance." "Damn the inheritance." Ethan's voice cracked like a whip, the sound ricocheting off the walls. He stopped abruptly, turning to face her, his eyes dark and tumultuous, the sea in a storm. "This isn't just about money or property. This is about us." The passion in his words struck her like a physical blow, the intensity of it stealing her breath. She had never doubted that they were connected, that their lives were irrevocably intertwined, but hearing it, feeling it so viscerally, was something else entirely. It was as if the very foundations of her world had shifted, revealing a chasm she hadn't known existed. "Do you think I wanted this?" Mia shot back, her own anger flaring to life, a match struck in the darkness. Her voice was sharp, slicing through the charged air between them. "Do you think I wanted to deceive everyone, to deceive you? I was trying to hold on to what little I could?" Ethan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that cut through her defenses like a knife. The laughter was devoid of mirth, a hollow echo that reverberated through the room. "You were trying to control the uncontrollable, Mia, and look where that got us." The words hung between them like a challenge, and for a moment silence reigned, thick and heady, with unspoken truths. Then, without warning, Ethan closed the distance between them, his presence a force of nature that swept her up in its wake. His movements were swift, decisive, as if propelled by an unseen force. His hands cupped her face, his touch both tender and demanding. The warmth of his skin contrasted sharply with the chill that had settled in her bones. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked, the question a raw, aching plea that cracked her heart wide open. Mia swallowed hard, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a physical fang. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as her past choices loomed large, casting long shadows. "Because I was afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling with the force of her confession. "Afraid of losing you, of losing everything." His gaze softened, the storm within him ebbing away to reveal the vulnerability beneath. The anger that had fueled him moments ago dissipated, leaving in its wake a quiet understanding. "You never had to be afraid of that," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Not with me." The truth of his words settled in her bones, a balm to the wounds she had inflicted upon herself. She leaned into him, her body aligning with his, the warmth of his embrace chasing away the lingering chill of doubt. In his arms, she found a sanctuary, a fleeting moment of peace amidst the chaos. Their lips met in a collision of need and desperation, a kiss that spoke of all the things words could not convey. It was a moment suspended in time, a heartbeat of clarity amidst the chaos, and as Mia lost herself in the familiarity of him, she felt the last of her defenses crumble away. But the respite was brief, the reality of their situation pressing back in with relentless force. They broke apart, breathless and unsteady, their eyes locked in a silent conversation that spoke of promises and complications. The world outside continued its morning symphony, the distant chirping of birds a reminder of life moving on, indifferent to their turmoil. "What's next?" Ethan asked, his voice a rough whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. The question was laden with uncertainty, a door opening onto an unknown future. Mia shook her head, the enormity of the question almost overwhelming. "I don't know," she said, her voice a fragile thread of uncertainty. "But we have to face it together." He nodded, the determination in his gaze a lifeline she clung to. There was a resolve in his eyes, a promise that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. "Then let's do it," he said, his words a vow that resonated with something deep inside her. "No more lies, no more running." The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and choices that would test the very fabric of their relationship. But as Mia looked into Ethan's eyes, she felt a flicker of hope, a spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, they could weather this storm. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to kindle a fire deep within her. The doorbell rang, a sharp intrusion that shattered the fragile peace they had found. Mia's heart lurched in her chest, a visceral reminder that their world was still on the brink of upheaval. The sound echoed in the space between them, a stark reminder of the external forces they could not ignore. Ethan's expression darkened, suspicion flaring in his eyes. His body tensed, the readiness of a predator poised to protect. "Expecting someone?" Mia shook her head, the tension knotting her stomach tightening with each passing second. An unease settled over her, a whisper of foreboding that prickled at her consciousness. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not at all." Together, they moved towards the door, their steps in sync, a united front against whatever lay on the other side. As Mia reached for the doorknob, she felt Ethan's hand settle on her back, a comforting presence that steadied her nerves. The door swung open, revealing a figure that stood silhouetted against the pale morning light. It was a face Mia recognized, a face that sent a jolt of shock and disbelief coursing through her veins. Her breath caught in her throat, the world narrowing to the person standing before her. "Hello, Mia," the newcomer said, their voice a silky, dangerous thread that wound its way around her heart. The words were smooth, polished, hiding sharp edges beneath their veneer. "I think we need to talk." The world tilted on its axis, the ground shifting beneath her feet as recognition and fear collided in a maelstrom of emotion. The air seemed to thicken, time stretching and slowing as Mia's mind raced to catch up with her heart. The game had changed, the stakes raised to a level she had never anticipated, and as Mia met the newcomer's gaze, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The past she had tried so hard to bury had returned, demanding to be reckoned with, and she realized with a sinking heart that the edge of truth was only the beginning. Chapter 4. The Unveiling. The room felt impossibly small, the air heavy with the gravity of the moment. The walls, lined with old faded wallpaper depicting pastoral scenes, seemed to lean inwards, imprisoning those within under the weight of unspoken truths. A single lamp cast a dim, flickering light, its bulbs struggling against the encroaching shadows, while the scent of old wood and dust hung in the air, a reminder of the past that refused to be forgotten. Mia's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed the chaos swirling inside her. The thudding was a drumbeat of fear and anticipation, each pulse resonating with the uncertainty that gripped her soul. Her hands were clammy, fingers twitching slightly as they betrayed her inner turmoil. She took a deep breath, the taste of the rune's stale air coating her tongue, a bitter reminder of everything that had led to this moment. The newcomer stood in the doorway, an unwelcome specter from the past. Their presence was a stark reminder of the tangled web of secrets and lies that had brought them all to this point. The figure was tall and lean, cloaked in a long dark coat that seemed to absorb the light, their face shadowed and inscrutable, save for piercing eyes that gleamed with familiarity and veiled malice. "Mia," the newcomer repeated, their voice smooth and calculating. A mask of civility stretched over something darker. The sound was like silk over steel, deceptively gentle yet carrying an underlying threat. "It's been a long time." Ethan stood beside Mia, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. His broad shoulders were tense, a silent testament to the protectiveness that surged through him. His eyes, normally warm and inviting, were cold and hard as they fixed on the newcomer, suspicion and protectiveness burning in their depths. The room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of his resolve, a silent promise that he would not let harm come to Mia. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice a low growl tinged with warning, like a wolf guarding its territory. The sound filled the room, reverberating off the walls and sending a shiver down Mia's spine. The newcomer smiled, a slow, predatory curve of lips that sent a chill through the air. It was a smile that spoke of secrets kept and power wielded, a reminder that the past was never truly buried. "I think you know what I want," they said, their gaze flicking between Mia and Ethan with a disconcerting familiarity, as if they could see into the very depths of their souls. "The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it?" Mia's breath caught, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her like a physical force. She had thought she could control the narrative, that she could keep the past buried, but it was all unraveling, slipping through her fingers like sand. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in with the relentless pressure of unspoken truths. Her mind raced through memories, each one a sharp reminder of the decisions that had led her here, to this confrontation she had hoped to avoid. The newcomer took a step forward, their expression shifting from amusement to something more serious, more dangerous. "You thought you could hide it forever, didn't you?" they asked, their voice a soft caress laced with steel. "But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it." Ethan's hand found Mia's, his touch a lifeline in the storm. The warmth of his palm was a reminder that she was not alone, that they faced this together. "Whatever you're here for, it's not going to work," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Mia and we're stronger than you think." The words were a promise, a vow that resonated deep within Mia, giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. She straightened, meeting the newcomer's gaze with a determination that burned bright and fierce. Her eyes, once shadowed by fear and doubt, now shone with a clarity born of resolve. "The truth is out," Mia said, her voice unwavering despite the tremor in her heart. "I lied about the pregnancy, I made mistakes, but we're moving forward together." The words were a declaration, a line drawn in the sand, and as she spoke them, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a release from the bonds of her secrets. The newcomer tilted their head, their expression inscrutable. "And what about the rest of it?" they asked, their voice a velvet challenge. "What about the reason you lied in the first place?" The question hung in the air, a loaded gun waiting to be fired. Mia felt Ethan's grip tighten on her hand, his support a silent reminder that she wasn't alone in this. The inheritance, the legacy, the tangled history that bound them all. It was time to confront it, to face the truth head-on. I lied because I was afraid, Mia admitted, her voice raw with honesty. Afraid of losing everything, of losing Ethan. But I've realized that the inheritance doesn't define us. It's not who we are. Ethan nodded, his gaze unwavering as he looked at the newcomer. His jaw was set, a stubborn line that spoke of his determination and loyalty. We won't be manipulated, he said, his voice firm. Not by you, not by anyone. We're choosing our own path. The newcomer's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something, respect perhaps, or the grudging acknowledgement of a worthy opponent. Very well, they said, their voice cool and measured. But don't think for a moment this is over. The warning hung in the air, a lingering shadow that refused to be dispelled. Mia met their gaze, a knowing look passing between them. The game was far from over, the stakes higher than ever, but for the first time, Mia felt ready to face whatever came next. As the newcomer turned to leave, their parting words were a whisper of promise and threat. I'll be watching. The door closed with a quiet click, leaving Mia and Ethan alone in the quiet aftermath of the storm. The air was still heavy with tension, but there was a new clarity, a sense of direction that had been missing before. The room, once oppressive, now felt like a space of potential, the dim light casting hopeful shadows on the walls. Ethan turned to her, his eyes searching hers, and in that moment, she saw everything they had been through, every challenge they had faced. She saw the strength and kindness that defined him, the unwavering support that had been her rock through the darkest times. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle, the warmth of his concern wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. Mia nodded, a small, shaky smile tugging at her lips. I think I will be, she said, her voice a soft confession of hope. As long as we face it together. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and she melted against him, the warmth of his body chasing away the last vestiges of doubt. In his embrace she found a refuge, a promise of a future they would build together, free from the shadows of the past. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the room, a new day dawning with the promise of possibilities. Outside, the world was still, the storm a distant memory, and as Mia stood with Ethan, she felt the weight of their shared journey lift, leaving only the bright, shining hope of what lay ahead. Together, they would face the challenges, the uncertainties, the truths yet to be revealed. Together, they would carve out their own destiny, a legacy of their own making. And as they held each other, the future stretched out before them, an unwritten canvas waiting to be filled with the colors of their choices, their love, their truth. The edge of truth had been crossed, and as Mia looked into Ethan's eyes, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. It was the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild, to redefine who they were and who they wanted to become. And in that moment, amidst the quiet aftermath of revelation, Mia allowed herself to believe in the possibility of redemption, of healing, of a love strong enough to weather any storm. The path ahead was uncertain,